In today's tutorial, we're going to take a component that was written in Vue 2's Options API and refactor it using Vue 3's Composition API. And we'll do it right after this. What's up, friends? My name is Dan Vega, and if you're new to the channel, you can head over to danvega.dev and learn a little bit more about me. One of the things that you'll find right away is that I'm passionate about software development. I love to learn, and I love to take what I've learned and teach others. So you'll find a bunch of links to articles, videos, courses that I've created. So if you want to learn more about me, head over to danvega.dev. As I said in the open today, we are going to talk about the Vue 3 Composition API. So I've talked a lot about the Vue 3's Composition API, and I will link to a couple videos below in the description. But what I haven't done yet is taken an existing component that is using the Options API and refactor it using the Composition API. So that's what we're going to do today. So as always, anything that we talk about, I will have in the description below, including the source code for everything that we walk through today. You can head over to my GitHub account, find the repo called the OpenDB composition demo, and everything that you need will be right there. Also, I'll include a link to this. There's a lot of really great information here about the Composition API as far as the API reference goes. A lot of the methods that we're going to talk about are right here in the API reference, and this is a really good place to start. So go ahead and check this out as well. Finally, what we're going to be doing today is talking about a component that my friend Ray Camden wrote. And there's a really good article that he wrote here about building table sorting and pagination in Vue.js with async data. So he had this table where you can kind of click next and previous and maybe display, in this case, 20 records at once and then paginate through them. And he's using the OpenDB, Open Brewery DB for paginating a list of breweries in a particular city. And he had this example, and then he went and rewrote it in version 2, doing some async stuff. So you can go through and kind of read Ray's article here. But what I'm going to end up doing is taking version 2 here, which is using the Options API right now, and we're just going to rewrite that using the Composition API. No particular reason, just wanted to find a component that I could rewrite and make some sense of. And this is a really great article by Ray that I suggest you go ahead and check out first. So with that, let's jump into Visual Studio Code and begin. All right, so the first thing that we need to do is create a new Vue project. And to do that, we're going to use the Vue CLI. So I'm going to come into terminal here and I'm going to type in Vue create, and we need to give it a name. So let's say Open Brewery Refactor, and we're just going to hit enter, and it's going to ask us what we want this project to look like. So I'm actually just going to create a default project, and the Vue CLI is going to go off and create us a default project. Okay, next we're going to actually cd into that project. And this is the Vue CLI project right now because Vue 3 is not out, has created us a Vue 2 project. And we want a Vue 3 project to work with the Composition API. To do so, the Vue CLI, there's a plugin for the Vue CLI called vue-next. So with like any other Vue CLI plugin, you can come in and say vue add and then the name of the plugin to add that plugin. So if we go vue add and vue-next, it's going to go through and make a couple of changes to update it to use Vue 3. So it'll be things like main.js, the package.json, and anything else it needs to update. Awesome. So we're done there, and that will give us everything we need to get started. So we actually don't have this project open in this instance of Visual Studio Code, so I'll go ahead and open it. And if we take a look at the package.json, you'll see that we're using Vue 3.0.0 Alpha 4. So pretty close to current. I think we're on Alpha 8 right now, but that's the Vue CLI vue-next plugin that's adding that for us. And if you look at source and main.js, you'll see the new global API syntax here. So we are definitely using Vue 3. All right, the first thing I want to do is actually delete some of this boilerplate code. So I'm going to come in here and delete this hello world. And I'm going to come into app.vue and actually just get rid of all of this and start with a fresh one. And that's good. So in components, I'm actually going to create a new component, and we're going to call this brewery list. And I'm just going to copy in some code from Ray's article just so we don't have to go through and type it. But again, if you read through the article at all or had a chance, this is basically a list of breweries based on city, and you can kind of paginate through them and display X amount, so in this case 20 per page. So we have our brewery list component. I want to go ahead and display this now. So what I'm going to do is come into app, and I'm going to go ahead and import. We're going to say brewery list from /components /brewery list. And then what I'm going to do is come down here and say components. Components. And we'll say we want brewery list. And then here in my template, I'm just going to display brewery list. And okay, so if we go ahead and if we didn't do anything wrong, we should be able to npm run serve. And that should go ahead and start up. Great. And if we head back to the browser and go ahead and refresh this. All right, so we have a table listing with name, city, and state. Here's the name of the brewery. And here's some debugging info just being outputted below. And as you click next, this table list will go ahead and get updated. And you can see the debugging info. We are sorting by name. Direction is ascending. Page is 2. So as we start going through, we can go ahead and see the different pages. Now, if we go ahead and click on city, we can see that the breweries are now ordered by city, direction ascending. And if we choose state, we can do the same. And then you can paginate through these as well. So that is the default component. That's how it works. Let's go ahead and take a look at some code real quick. So as you can see, there's a table listing here. We have name, city, and state. We're looping over our breweries, and we're just displaying name, city, and state. There are a couple buttons here for pagination, and there's the debugging info. So here's the options API, everything that we're kind of used to in Vue 2. We're declaring some data, so this declares some reactive data. We have things like an empty array of breweries. We have our sort and our sort direction, the page size, and then the current page. So here we have an asynchronous method called load breweries that is going to create a new variable called data, and it's going to await the fetch call. So fetch returns a promise, so we want to wait for that to come back before moving on. And once that comes back, we're going to set the data this.breweries equal to data.json, which is also a promise, so we want to wait for that to come back. Then we have some methods down here for sorting, next page, previous page. We also have a computed property to determine whether the user can go back or not. So if it's this dot current page is equal to 1, then they can't go back. And then we have a sort string. So pretty simple component, really nice component though. Again, I really enjoyed Ray's article talking about how to set up pagination in Vue. So let's go ahead and stop this. And what I want to do now is instead of adding a new component, I'm just going to do everything here in Vue. So I'm just going to type out a new component here, and we will write our composition API. We'll refactor that brewery list right here in app. All right, so let's just start building this out. I'm going to start with some of the markups. So we're going to build a table here. And in that table, we're going to have a T head, we're going to have a T row, and we're going to have some headings here. One is going to be name, one is going to be city, and one is going to be state. And after this, we're going to have a t body, and we're going to have a row. And in that row, we're going to have the name. We're going to have city, and we're going to have state. So that's that. And then after our table, we're going to have a p tag, and we're going to have a button. And this is going to be previous, and this is going to be next. So the first thing I want to talk about here is notice that we have a table element and then a paragraph element. In Vue 2, you could not do this because you need exactly one root element. In Vue 3, you can have more than one root element. Now, that is going to be in Vue 3 in the final version, right? What's happening here is we're using a Vue 2 project, and we've just kind of added in this experimental plugin for Vue 3. So it's still going to complain about that, but it's really just the ESLint rule that's complaining. So if we came down here into rules and we added one for Vue valid template root, and we just turn that off, this should work now. Again, you can't do that in Vue 2 because Vue 2 doesn't allow you to do that, but Vue 3 does. It's just the ES rule that would complain if we went ahead and started this up. So I'm going to go ahead and fire this up and see if this starts without complaining. And it does. So far, so good. So the next thing I want to do is I want to talk about using the composition API. So everything with the composition API starts with the setup method. So we create a new method called setup, and inside that method is where we're going to set up basically everything that our component is going to need. So the first thing that we're going to need is an array of breweries. So before we would do that in the data function. Here in the composition API, we use something called ref or reactive. And I will also link below to another video I did on this subject. Ref and reactive are two methods that allow you to create reactive data in the composition API. And there are reasons to use one over the other. So go ahead and check out that video if you want to learn more about that. But we're just going to go ahead and set up breweries, and that is going to be equal to, and there is a ref method that we need to import from Vue. And we're going to set that to an empty array. Okay, and actually I'm going to stop this so we don't get the annoying errors for now. Now again, I'll link to another video if you want to learn more about this, but I did a presentation on Vue 3 called Smaller, Faster, and Stronger. And we talked about how everything was named exports now, so you can't just import Vue globally. And this really helps with a lot of things, one of which is tree shaking, which will, if you're not using particular features in Vue, they will get tree shaking out of the bundle that gets shipped. So that is going to make your components, your application smaller and faster, which is really nice to see. So that's why we need to say we are importing ref, because ref is something we are using. So we need to explicitly say that we're using it. So then I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say, all right, hey, I know I have some page properties, and I'm going to use the other one here called reactive, which allows us to define some key value pairs here. So I'm going to say the current is 1 and the size is 20. And to me, those are properties that are kind of grouped together. So when we talk about page properties, we talk about the current one, which is 1. We talk about how many records I want to show on a particular page, that's 20. So I use ref and reactive, as I said in the video, the way that I would write normal JavaScript. And in this case, these two properties are related, and they belong to something called a page. And so that's why I have decided to group them together there. Same thing with sorting. So I have sort and I have reactive, and those can be We have a key, so what are we sorting by? And the default is going to be name, and the default is going to be ascending. So we also had that can't go back property. So let's say const, and actually let's just look at that real quick. If we look in our brewery list, we have a computed property called can't go back. And so we need a computed property here, and we're going to call this can't go back. And the way we do this is we just use computed. Again, we're importing that from Vue. So computed is going to take a function. So we're going to pass in a arrow function here, and that is going to look at page. So page is this property right here. Page.current, and is that equal to 1? So that's our computed property for can't go back. And we need one more computed property, and that is for sort strings. So const sort string is equal to computed, and that is going to take a method, and it's going to look at the sort direction. And if it's equal to ascending, sort.key is equal to this plus sort.key. That looks right. So this is just a sort string. This is how we are passing sorting to the Open Brewery database, and that this is just a format it takes, and it knows how to sort it then. So this is how we will end up passing it to them. So now, normally I wouldn't write it like this. Normally I would start with things like breweries and page and sort, and I don't need those computer properties yet, but we've already seen the component. We know what is involved, and so you're just kind of seeing me refactor this on the fly. Now, the next thing we need to do is we need to get a list of those breweries. So normally we would create some reactive property in our component called breweries, and then we'd use the created lifecycle hook, and we'd go out and we'd call our API using fetch. So we did an async await back in the brewery list, and we want to do something similar here. All right, so now I want to talk about when the setup method is actually called. So I'm going to go back to the browser and the API reference here. And if we look at the setup method, there's a little section here on invocation timing. So setup is called right after the initial props resolution when a component instance is created. Lifecycle wise, it's called right before the before create hook. So that is important to know of when it's actually being called. So from a standpoint of where do we call it here, anything that we would have done in, say, a created lifecycle hook where we call out to an API to get some data, that is going to be done right here in our setup method. Now, we could just go ahead and create a fetch here, or create a fetch call and go out, fetch the data, and set breweries equal to whatever comes back. But we are going to wrap this inside of a method called watch. And again, we're going to have to import that from Vue. And so normally you would see something that looks like this. And anytime some sort of data inside this watch method changes, then it would go ahead and get run again. So again, I want to go back to the documentation. If we go over to watch, you can read through some more information here. But it's really to watch a sort, like a single source. So anytime data that is reactive inside of that watch function changes, it's going to be rerun. And I just want to see if there's any. So it doesn't say, I'm sure it says it in here somewhere, but perform the side access. Okay, so what, I'm sure it says it somewhere in there, but what this does is actually runs once first. So we don't have to explicitly call it. So we don't have to like somehow say, go ahead and run watch before as you're doing this, it's going to go ahead and run watch the first time, and then anytime some reactive data inside of there changes, it will go ahead and be rerun. So unlike where in the lifecycle, created lifecycle hook, you may call a method called get breweries, right? And then watch that data, and anytime other data changes, you may have to recall that get breweries method. We're doing that all inside of watch here. So the one thing I want to do here is I do want to make this async because we're going to go use await. So I'm going to make this async. And now what I'm going to do is go ahead and set up a response object. So response is going to equal, and we're going to await, and then the fetch. And let me just grab this URL because there's a lot going on in there. And you can see we're calling api.openbrewerydb.org, breweries, and then we're passing in the page, the per page, and the sort. So again, just like we did before, we're going to go ahead and once we get that response back, we're going to set breweries.value equal to response. Oops, we need to await. Again, this is going to return another promise, so we got to wait for that. Response.json. And now that should work. So it's going to fire off once when the setup method runs, and then anytime one of those values inside there changes, it will go ahead and run again. And then I'm just going to copy in a few functions here because there's really nothing interesting going on here. Same kind of functions before, sort breweries, next page, and previous page. Only now we're working within the setup function, and we have these variables like page and sort that we can just go ahead and call right here. Now finally, to make all of this work, we need to go ahead and return some data. So anything that we want to use within our markup, in our template, we need to return. So I'm going to return breweries. I'm going to return sort breweries, previous page, next page, and can't go back. So that's that. Now we can come back up to our template and fix some things. So first off, we're going to loop over this. So we're going to say v4 for b in breweries. We're going to say our key is b.id. And then we're just going to update this to b.city. Oops, b.name. Okay, so far so good. I want to add some click handlers to the columns. So I want to say, hey, when somebody clicks on this, I want you to sort breweries. That's one of the methods that we have down there. And I want you to sort it by, and then this column name is going to be name. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this, and we'll just paste this in here and say city, and we'll say state. Okay, now I have this next and previous button. So first on the previous page, I want to add a click handler, and I want to say, hey, when this is clicked, I want you to call that previous page method. If we want this disabled when we can't go back, right? So we have that computed property that we return called can't go back. And then we just want a click handler for this, which is going to go to next page. So, all right, so far that looks good. I'm going to add some styles from before in here, just so we get a little bit of a cleaner look. And that should do it. So let's go ahead and try and run this. And if we didn't screw anything up, we should be able to see this in action. All right, so let's go back to the browser. We're going to refresh this. And there is our table. So we have some striped rows here just to give it a cleaner look. We have name, city, and state. If we go ahead and click next, we can see that we can page through here, which is nice. If we click on something like city, we can start to sort by city. So working exactly the same, but we've rewritten it using the composition API. Now, we could probably even take this a step further. So one of the nice things about the composition API is we can start to write composable logic. So things like sorting and paging could be refactored out even further into generic sorting and paging functions that could then be used across apps for things like this. But I wanted to keep this somewhat simple just so we can see. Even more so, I would probably go in here, and the idea behind the setup function now is, or the composition API, is that we can start to create our components by feature and not by options, right? So to me, things like paging and sorting, I would just kind of move down, right? Because these are not have anything to do with the brewery stuff, right? So I would come in here and I can kind of move this down, and now right away we can see that like this has to do with fetching brewery data, right? Now I have a page, sort, can't go back, and sort string, and maybe this page has to do with these. So let's come back up here. And then this is paging, and all of this is sorting, right? So now, as you can see, if I were to come into this component later on and need to work on something, say a specific feature like paging, all that functionality is grouped together. Whereas in the options API, it is all over the place. And again, I'll reference you back to a video I did called Vue 3 Smaller, Faster, and Stronger, where I talked a lot about this and really the big advantages of the composition API. Again, this is kind of a smaller component, so I don't know that it makes a whole lot of sense just yet. I could see it if we start to refactor out this paging and sorting functionality. I really, really like it, and I find myself using it more and more, even in smaller components, just because I know that if I have a bunch of reusable logic, I can create some composition functions, and it's just making my life a whole lot easier. But again, this is something to remember, that the composition API is an optional way of writing your components. Optional being the key here. You do not have to stop writing components the way you do today in Vue 2. This is just another way when you start hitting some of the limitations of the options API. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial today, as we took an existing component that was written in Vue 2 and we converted it over to Vue 3's composition API. So question of the day: have you used the composition API yet? After watching this, has anything changed? Are you interested in trying to write components in the composition API? If so, great. If not, what's kind of holding you back there? So if you found value in this video, please go ahead and leave me a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, and as always, happy coding, friends.